A heart beating from a distant shore, longing for the oneness. A heart beating from a distant shore, longing for the oneness love can bring.
The history of America's expansion west is a big story. The area of the West is big. We can't comprehend all of it. Mountains of reports and writings are available, but today they are read only anecdotally, or not at all by the general population. The journals of Meriwether Lewis and William Clark, and a couple other members of the Corps of Discovery, were among the first to introduce Eastern politicians to the possibilities of new powers and riches. The Western plains and mountains and indigenous Indians conveyed new information and experience to the early travelers on the Missouri River across the Louisiana lands purchased by President Tom Jefferson and colleagues. At the same time, foreign travelers delivered to these lands and people a new message of their own, that the Great Father in Washington is the power to be reckoned with, to be obeyed and respected. At the end of August 1804, the Corps finally encountered for the first time what was believed to be the potentially most formidable and feared native communities of the northern prairies, the Sioux. Yankton Sioux bands at Calumet Bluffs, near today's border between Nebraska and South Dakota, had exchanged gifts and hospitality in a friendly manner, alleviating some of the anxiety that the captains of the expedition had. But during that meeting, caution again was advised. A little further north, the real power of the Great Plains, the Teton Sioux, might not be so accommodating. Turns out they were not. Among the Lakota, Nakota, and Dakota people, leadership was inextricably bound with the cultural values of humility, respect, and integrity. Traditionally, these leaders were not elected by popular vote, but selected by a special group appointed through the village, lineage. As in a monarchy, leaders were chosen by the people who would follow them only so long as their judgment and qualities were worthy of following. This concept of leadership was difficult for many U.S. government officials to understand. They were used to a system in which one person was elected to be spokesperson for many. For the Sioux people, however, the value of humility prevented individuals from presuming to speak for someone else. This practice also made it difficult for historians to pronounce leaders among the Sioux. Some historical figures that were considered leaders were not necessarily followed by everyone, creating controversy over the right to be called a leader among the people. Today, however, several prominent figures among the ancestors of the Standing Rock Nation can be noted for their contributions to history. The more notable leaders among them include Two Bears from the Upper Yankton, John Grass, Blackfeet, Mad Bear, Lower Yankton, and Running Antelope, Hung Papa. About noon on September 7th, the Corps captains Lewis and Clark approached the base of a shale hill and saw a, quote, village of small animals that burrow in the ground. Lewis called them barking squirrels, noting,
"They will generally set and bark at you as you approach them, their note being much that of little toy dogs. Their yelps are in quick succession, and at each they a motion to their tails upwards."
The crew eventually hauled water from the Missouri River to flush out these animals, but settled for the capture of a single prairie dog. Remarkably, they made a pet of it, took it all the way to Fort Mandan, and then had it shipped to Washington, D.C. and President Jefferson in the spring. Lewis himself kept especially precise notes of natural wildlife and specimens during this period, although it seems a considerable portion of his notes disappeared. He observed a magpie, mule deer, coyote, and jackrabbit that Lewis said could leap 21 feet. Buffalo herds on the plains were larger, counted in the hundreds or even thousands. The men's diet included more bison, elk, and deer, although Sergeant Gass reported his buffalo kill on September 8, left to be collected later, had been carried off by wolves. According to Ordway, the men were storing all the horns because the material would later make excellent handles for forks and spoons. Two days later, near a large salt spring, Clark discovered a petrified backbone and teeth of an enormous fish with a tapering tail, measured to be approximately 45 feet long. Captain Clark killed the first wild goat, which in fact was a plains pronghorn. Lewis went hunting for this agile goat only to be denied a close encounter to engage with his gun. On the prairie, he noted, we, quote,
drank of the water of a small pool which had collected on this plain from the rains.
The season at this latitude was changing, introduced by extensive periods of drenching rain and drizzle and cooler winds. The boats moved further along, quote,
a beautiful plain surrounded with timber, in which there is great quantities of fine plums.
Here, near present-day Chamberlain and Oakoma, the expedition camped. The location was named Plum Camp, or at one point Pleasant Camp. The party stayed for several days, waiting out the weather and fixing their boats, which were increasingly susceptible to groundings on sandbars in the shallower river at this time. The loads were lightened and rearranged. The prairies were explored. The weather cleared, and after 2 days the boats rather quickly navigated the Big Bend portion of the Missouri, now part of the Crow Creek Indian Reservation, and the lower Brule Sioux, a rich bottomland of grasses, cattails, cedars, cottonwoods, and prickly pear clusters. A sandbar chosen for camp broke up in the middle of the night. The captains acted quickly in the moonlight and just barely avoided a complete capsizing of their pirogues by pushing off and landing on the opposite shore in the darkness. Leaves on the trees were turning as the autumn season crept southward in mid-September. Clark observed some temporary camps of the Lakota or Teton Sioux for the first time along the riverbank, quote, all of them round and to a point at top. It was the 24th of September when the Tetons suddenly made a discomfiting appearance, stealing John Coulter's horse while he and companions were distracted and preparing meat on the shore. A tense situation developed over several days as the Corps captains sought to initiate friendly overtures while confronting unfamiliar Indian behaviors that alternated between outright hostility and gestures of gifting and prideful displays of hospitality, including numerous attempts to share their women with the men. Drouillard used sign language, and Frenchman Private Cruzat, the expedition's fiddle player with one eye, knew the Omaha language and music to appease the natives, but communication in Sioux language was awkward and prone to misunderstandings. These events occurred above the mouth of what is today called the Bad River. The captains named it the Teton River at the time. Fort Pierre, later built on the location, morphed into a larger establishment of what is today the city of Pierre, the capital of South Dakota. During the late 1700s to early 1800s, the Teton Sioux, referred to generally as the Lakotas, came to control much of the Dakotas and lands referred to as the Black Hills or Black Mountains by eviction of the Cheyenne and the Crow tribes. These areas later becoming western South Dakota, eastern Montana, northern Wyoming, and northern Nebraska. Other enemies of the Northern Plains Lakota, or Sioux, translated variously as snake or enemy, included some Frenchmen, Ojibwe, Assiniboine, Mandans, Hidatsa, and the Omahas, Ponca, and the Kiowa Indians, among other smaller tribes. Sometimes allies and sometimes enemies of the Lakota were the Arikara tribe. The drama of life on the northern plains during the 19th century entails a complex symbiosis of poverty and poetry, of art and grinding tedium, of warriors and militias, of heroes and villains. Settlers, entrepreneurs, adventurers, and Indians all jostled each other and occasionally killed each other to gain advantage in an early struggle for survival on the prairies and foothills of the Rocky Mountains. Among the newcomers, gradually there evolved, in the Western saga, a conflicting tension between believers in the, quote, noble savage, but still savage, and advocates for extermination or extinction of these just plain, quote, savages. The Discovery Band encountered both versions of humanity on their journey and before reaching the winter camp of 1804. Captain William Clark expressed his frustration at one point after the alternating confrontations and revelries with the Tetons near today's Pierre, South Dakota.
These are the vilest miscreants of the savage race. Unless these people are reduced to order by coercive measures, I am ready to pronounce that the citizens of the United States can never enjoy but partially the advantages which the Missouri presents.
Compare Clark's first impression, though moderated later, with the artist George Catlin describing his effort to paint and preserve an Indian culture he admired. In Catlin's words, quote,
a production of a literal and graphic delineation of the living manners, customs, and character of an interesting race of people who are rapidly passing away from the face of the earth, thus snatching from a hasty oblivion what could be saved for the benefit of posterity and perpetuating it as a fair and just monument to the memory of a truly lofty and noble race.
History would discover both the noble savage and record the disappearing Indian, but consensus was too much to ask for in the 19th century. At Bad River, Lewis and Clark and company encountered a number of bully warriors who did not hesitate at the first quarrel opportunity to draw bows and arrows on the travelers. Faced with a drawn sword and loaded guns of the Corps members, plus the blunderbuss and swivel gun on the boats. At the same time, though, two chiefs, Black Buffalo and another called Partisan, maneuvered their competing egos to elicit some balance of amiable relations with the clearly agitated captains. Captain Clark found himself surrounded. Quote,
I found myself warm and spoke in very positive terms.
This initial display of hostilities was successfully diffused by Black Buffalo, although the chiefs refused Clark's offer of his hand. The crew anchored at a timbered island that Clark promptly described as Bad-Humored Island, quote,
as we were in a bad humor.
Ordway's account of this incident said Captain Clark told the Indians that, quote,
we were sent by your great father, the President of the U.S., and that if they misused us, that he and Captain Lewis could, by writing to him, have them all destroyed as it were in a moment.
Then the chief said he was sorry, according to Ordway. For a couple of days afterward, the Corps of Discovery supped with the Indians at their camps, eating, among other things, roasted dog, buffalo beef, and pemmican. The community offered up dances, including a performance with acquired scalps of dozens of Omahas recently killed, hanging on poles, while the chiefs, brandishing the, quote, pipe of peace, talked fur trading. The Lakota apparently had in mind to interdict future river travel in order to maintain their lucrative middlemen trading status among the northern plains inhabitants.
Women came forward highly decorated in their way with the scalps and the trophies of war of their fathers, husbands, brothers, and near connections, and proceeded to dance the war dance.
Clark commented further on the squaws.
Cheerful, fine-looking women, not handsome, high cheeks, dressed in skins. I may say perfect slaves to the men, as all squaws of nations much at war, or where the women are more numerous than the men.
Still, Clark and Lewis were wary, especially since a rumor spread by some surviving Omaha captives in Black Buffalo's village suggested that a plan to stop the expedition was afoot. The time for the Corps to depart had come, but that effort too did not go smoothly, as Indians sought to keep hold of the shore anchoring cables. Anyway, a twist of tobacco and probably some offering of whiskey was enough to dissuade all-out battle, and the exploring party was released to continue their journey to the north. On a small island upstream on September 28, Clark wrote in his journal,
I am very unwell for want of sleep, determined to sleep tonight if possible.
Plains were turning golden brown, geese were flying overhead to the south, and the October winds sometimes were cold.